So, The Holdovers, recent Oscar nominee, but not winner, except for Best Supporting Actress, well deserved. The Holdovers script has been accused of plagiarism. What? So, Alexander Payne is the one who's been accused of this, who is the director of the film. He is not technically the credited screenwriter of the film, though. That is David Hemingson. Though Alexander Payne has said that he admits he was very involved in the writing process, but this accusation is coming from a screenwriter, Simon Stephenson, who worked on films like Luca and Paddington 2 in kind of assistant writerly roles. And he wrote a drama called Frisco. And the log line of Frisco reads, quote, "A 40-something pediatric allergist who specializes in hazelnut and is facing a divorce learns lessons in living from a wise beyond her years, terminally ill 15-year-old patient when she crashes his weekend trip to a conference in San Francisco," end quote. Now, you might be noticing some similarities. If you've seen The Holdovers, which is also about an older kind of crotchety, figure who is kind of left to take care of this younger character. Stevenson basically complained to the Writers Guild of America, their board, saying, quote, that the evidence the Holdover screenplay has been plagiarized line by line from Frisco is genuinely overwhelming. Anybody who looks at even the briefest sample pretty much invariably uses the word brazen, end quote. So what's kind of the details of this accusation? So in terms of the timeline, so supposedly in 2013, not supposedly, this did happen. Frisco, that script, landed third place on the Blacklist. If you don't know what the Blacklist is, it's a contest or organization. I'm not quite sure exactly. I've known about it for years, but I've never quite actually looked into it. Essentially, it's an opportunity to recognize all these unproduced scripts in Hollywood. And so if your script gets on the Blacklist, there's a high chance someone will take notice and potentially maybe produce the film. At around the same time, Alexander Payne, the director of The Holdovers, we know based off of email exchanges that have come out, had access to the script to Frisco to potentially direct it. But he ultimately passed on the project. Then a few years later in 2019, the script was again brought to Alexander Payne, who again passes on it. In terms of the writing of The Holdovers, Payne has talked about the writing process. Like I said, he's not credited as a screenwriter, but was very involved. And he claimed, I think it was on a podcast, he claimed that he saw this French film from the 1930s and got the idea for some kind of story set at a boarding school. And then years later, Hemingson sends him a TV pilot that's also set in a boarding school. So Payne said here, quote, "So that's when I called up Hemingson and I said, 'Hey, you've written a great pilot. I don't want to do it, but would you consider writing a story for me set in that same world?' That's how it happened," end quote. He also went on to say, quote, "I had the idea, we hashed out the story idea together. He would send me different versions of what the story could be, and then I could say yes or put the kibosh on it or whatever, and then we kind of hashed it out together," end quote. So, according to him, he had this idea for years and then got this script from Hemingson, decided to work with him on it. But I guess Stevenson's argument here is that he kind of took, I guess, this nugget of a idea with the boarding school, saw the setup for his script Frisco, and kind of maybe overlapped them or combined them. And like I said, Stevenson reached out to the Writers Guild of America board, saying, quote, "I can demonstrate beyond any possible doubt that the meaningful entirety of the screenplay for a film with WGA-sanctioned credits that is currently on track to win a screenwriting Oscar has been plagiarized line by line from a popular unproduced screenplay of mine. I can also show that the director of the offending film was sent and read my screenplay on 2 separate occasions prior to the offending film entering development. By meaningful entirety, I do mean literally everything. Story, characters, structure, scenes, dialogue, the whole thing. Some of it is just insanely brazen. Many of the most important scenes are effectively unaltered and even remain visibly identical in layout on the page," end quote. Again, I'm not sure because it sounds like his idea is not similar at all, save for just an older person looking after a younger person. Again, I would maybe have to look at because he references characters and dialogue, so maybe that was more specific, but just on premise alone, I'm not sure. I can't really make a judgment one way or the other. The WGA usually doesn't investigate plagiarism of spec scripts, but it did, this Stevenson's complaint did cause, I guess, a discussion on the board. Ultimately, screenplay plagiarism cases are really rare, and even rarer do they succeed, right? Because it's so hard to prove that it was plagiarism, right? There's only a few examples of it ever even going to a trial. There was a case against the film Coming to America, and that, complaint ended up, that person was awarded over $800,000. But then conversely, there was a case against the film Shape of Water, and that was dismissed, right? And there's questions going into the future of potentially such cases. It's going to be changed by potentially artificial intelligence, right? You could have programs that can quickly scan scripts and compare potential similarities and quantify them in a more understandable way than if you just reading the two scripts as a human being, right? But overall, and ultimately, ownership of ideas is really tricky, right? It's really hard to not only prove this legally, but also just like ethically, like, what counts as, where's the line between inspiration and plagiarism, right? It's possible for people to come up with similar ideas, independent of one another, and Stephenson even acknowledges this, but he says, quote, I've been a working writer for 20 years in my native UK before I came to the US, and so I'm very aware that people can often have surprisingly similar ideas, and sometimes a few elements can be borrowed, etc. This just isn't that situation. The two screenplays are forensically identical and riddled with unique smoking guns throughout, end quote. So he feels this is not a case of that because Payne had access to this is not an example of similar ideas that were conceived independently. He's clearly identifying a cause and effect. But again, one idea can inspire pieces of another. You know what I mean? Again, when does inspiration end and plagiarism begin? And furthermore, every single thing that is ever made ever is heavily informed by inspirations and past things that you've seen or read or whatever it might be. Right? Obviously, ideally, your script is the more than the sum of its parts. That, yes, it's borrowing from all these things. Like, think of Star Wars, right? Which was a hodgepodge of all these inspirations and interests, but it was more than just the sum of all those inspirations. It was like 1 + 1 = 3. Something that chemically transformed in terms of those ideas, right? And this is critical why, it's critical to copyright your work, register your work with the WGA, and, have that paper trail if you're sending stuff out. So it helps Stephenson that he's able to be like, here's this email where it was sent to Payne, right? And Variety notes, just this one last thing here, Variety notes, funnily enough, that plagiarism kind of plays a somewhat major-ish role in the film. So it's kind of just ironic that now, it itself is being accused of plagiarism.